1.
Hey everyone, welcome to Powering Through Adversity, a series where we talk about how you can overcome adversity in the COVID-19 world.
If you've been laid off or are feeling unsure about your financial situation, we want you to know you are not alone and we want to help.
I'm Sam Kwong, aka Sammy K.
And I'm Matt Diamond, aka Matty D. And we are both reformed CPAs turned veteran recruiters inspired to support our global community that have been economically impacted by COVID-19 and its aftermath.
We hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, Sam Kwong here, and welcome back to another episode of Powering Through Adversity. Today is a very special day. We got a guest here, Mark Lipkin. Mark is an experienced, reliable, and trustworthy recruiting leader with a demonstrated history of working collaboratively, strategically to deliver outstanding results for global tech companies. For marquee tech companies such as, but not limited to, Walmart, Amazon, Twitch, and Gap. And many of those that have worked with Mark have mentioned that he's smart, relentless, a closer, and he's the best recruiter in the business and career. So Mark, you really pack quite the punch here in the recruiting world. And, just going over, lots of recommendations, lots of people talking. But I think today, Matt and I are extremely excited and fortunate to be speaking with you today in hopes to help our audience power through adversity during these difficult times. And so one of the questions here that I have, Mark, and I thought I would start, and this might date you back a little here, okay? So don't mind that, but I'm going to start by saying, it seems like you started your career, recruiting career in the 90s. If it's earlier, obviously let us know, but comparing that to what we have now, talk about some of the differences that you've seen. Talk to us about some of the nuances that you've seen, that have shifted over the past decade or two.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam and Matt, for having me here and the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be able to talk to everybody about the difference that we can make as recruiters and helping people along this pathway that we're on right now with COVID and the crisis that we're in. So actually, I'm a second generation recruiter. A lot of people don't know that, but my mom worked for Robert Half for a number of years.
Oh,
and
wow.
I can remember actually growing up, I was a teenager and hearing her talk about candidates. And my dad was actually a VP of sales. And so the conversations at dinner would be, how are you building that relationship? And everything was about building relationships. And, I never thought in a million years I'd actually get into this. I went to Cal. I was thinking about all different sorts of careers, but what had happened was in the late 90s were the tech boom. And I remember picking up a pamphlet and they had literally hundreds of tech roles. This was pre-LinkedIn. And so I joined an agency that was focused just on software development. And it probably because of all the years of just picking things up through osmosis, it came really easy to me. And also have a background in sports. And I think just kind of that the two and two together really kind of lended itself to recruiting. Probably a lot of people can relate to that. If you played competitive sports, you can kind of leverage that energy and that drive and that focus in things like sales and recruiting and kind of it's about results at the end of the day. And that's for me what really drove me. And just seeing like all the companies early on in the day, like Cisco and Yahoo, right? They were hiring like crazy, and they couldn't find enough people who are Java developers at the time. And prior to LinkedIn, the question was, how do you find these people? And so we would do things like, this is where I built my foundation as a recruiter, asking for referrals, building relationships. All those things are so important even to today. So that's kind of how I got my start.
Okay. Okay. And I guess digging a little deeper here, Mark, like comparing the landscape now to before. I mean, I know we're going through a lot of adversity, and I think the purpose of this podcast too is to really tease out some of those habits, some of those, advice, your strategic tips, excuse me. And so, comparing the landscape now, right? What are some of those differences where you're like, you know what, there's got to be a shift, right? Or, you know what, things are starting to change that you've noticed, right? Because you have such a long timeline in the recruiting field. And
Right.
so, yeah, what are some of those
Um,
differences?
what I noticed, one of the first things I noticed, LinkedIn made it a lot easier for recruiters to reach out to people.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, it was very difficult to get candidates, and you'd have to be extremely creative about how you're going to do that. I'll give you an example. I had a search. I think it was for a telecom company like Nortel Networks, and they needed a sales engineer for Canada, and I just couldn't find the right people. No one was on LinkedIn. I actually, I think I read a blog of someone who was in the space. He talked about kind of like on the side what he did. Figured out that somehow he was part of this cricket club and ended up getting the master list. And actually, he was the head of the cricket club.
Right.
And then that's how I got his phone number. So, I mean, the reason I bring that up is because you just had to be super creative, and every search was different. Every candidate was different. And it was really hard to get in touch with people. LinkedIn really changed everything in that regard. I think a lot of those skills that I learned, and a lot of recruiters who've been this for a long time can kind of relate to that those days where you really would have to hustle and figure out things and build relationships were really important. And for better or for worse, I think that LinkedIn's made it easy, maybe too easy, right? A lot of engineers, they ignore in-mails because they get so many, particularly if you're in a hot skill set, right? And so, LinkedIn's made it easy, but that means that you just kind of have to put in some extra work. So for instance, you have to figure out, other than their skill set, what is attractive about this candidate? What are the other things that you can talk about that kind of bridge that gap and create a sense of rapport, things that you might have in common. And, those are some of the things that I would talk to potential people looking for roles today. Other than, so for example, I have the exact skill set that you're looking for, pay attention to me. But if you can reach out to your network or people that you don't know and say, hey, we both went to Cal, or, we both we're both vegans, or whatever the situation might be, create that little sense of rapport. And that way people can remember you.
No, that's great. And Mark, I'm curious. I picked up the vegan example, but I'm slowly making my road there. And so, are you on that trajectory as well?
I've been dabbling with it off and on for past year or so, and it's good, but then I'm looking for a little bit more balance, I think.
Yeah, me too. Mark, we can hold hands. Matt and I talk about it too, and sometimes we're just back and forth on that. But
I stick my head in the sand with that stuff quite a bit. I'm on this, the spectrum of I need to get educated a little bit more before I jump into that. I'm kind of curious though. You mentioned what Sam kind of was asking about was like the differences in the landscape. And I think what I pulled out from what you just said, and I'd be curious to hear your commentary on it, was, ultimately recruiting, going back to, you sitting at your dinner table, is about relationship building and connecting with people. And so maybe actually, the flip side of that question is, about what are those first principles that haven't really changed in recruiting, since you started to now? Like, what are those basic foundational principles?
Well, at the end of the day, it's about people, right? And I think people, new recruiters kind of forget about that, right? So a lot of times, you see mass emails, or you hear engineers complaining quite a bit, like, I got a bulk email, they spelled my name wrong, or they don't really know who I am. But at the end of the day, I think new recruiters need to realize that it's really about people with complex lives, complex emotions. Everybody has a different reason why they were working at, or different career objectives. And so I think you really need to, one thing I would caution new recruiters and people sort of in the business that haven't really focused on this, that yes, it's about results. That's great. But at the end of the day, it's also about building relationships with people. And that hasn't changed, right? So spend time getting to know your candidates, getting to know your hiring managers. Let them know who you are as a person, what you stand for. You're, at the end of the day, your word is important. And those values will go, are still the same today as they were, 20 years ago.
Cool.
So that's how you build your reputation. You want to build it on things that are positive. You want to be there for people when they're your ideal candidate, or even when they're not your ideal candidate. They're going to talk. And so that's how you build your sense of who you are out in the public. And you need to, I think, in being such a sort of a role where recruiters talk to a lot of people, you want to think about those things what's important to you? What are the things that you actually want to stand for?
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I really love those values, Mark. And I think I'm actually wanting to even drill down one level deeper. And the reason why is because I think the three of us might be able to attest to this, is that, recruiters, for us, we typically or sometimes get a bad rap, right? Where, hey, the recruiter was very transactional. They just want me to, fill the job, right? However, what you've actually just displayed there is more of the relationship, or more of the value, regardless if they get the job, right? And so I think when looking at your track record here, Mark, you've worked at such great companies, marquee companies, larger companies. When you're working there, what are some of your goals? Is the goal to per se, fill the requisition? Is your goal to say, you know what, I really want to find people that really connect with who we are? What would you say is the overall, at the end of the day, when I'm here at a larger company, marquee brand, what are some of the things that when you go to bed at night, you're like, you know what, I did my job, the company should be happy, people are happy, and you're like, you know what, I did what I was supposed to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. You definitely, recruiting for Amazon, for example, or any of the larger companies, you need to be really focused and clear on and you need to basically deliver. But at the same time, you want to treat people well. And that comes back to, you're really, so just little things, I think anybody that's been on the other end of the spectrum and looking for a job, you reach out to them, you do your phone interview, you assess them as a candidate. Let's say you present them, every candidate wants to know immediately feedback, and just having that open dialogue with them. It's great that candidates, I think, nowadays are much more open to texting, whatever. Be open to that. Let them know. Be quick about your feedback. And at the same time, hiring managers could also potentially be your candidates down the road. So you just want to be transparent within reason, right? But you want to be quick about your communication. You want to get feedback, and then also set realistic timelines. Like, I think candidates really respect the fact, like, hey, I might not get feedback for you until about 3 or 4 days, but anything sooner I'll let you know. Just keeping that dialogue open. They really appreciate that. I think that what they don't like is having to follow up time and time again. A week's gone by, 2 weeks gone by. Sorry, I haven't let you know. Unfortunately, we're passing. That's not great,
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of keeping in mind, like, a little bit about you're dealing with people and humans, but at the same time, what you need to do to, close your roles as a recruiter. So you're working on, you have to be flexible and kind of work on both sides. But don't forget the human element as well, because look, you may only be hiring one person, but you reached out to 100. All those other 99 people need to be, treated with respect. You need to ask them for referrals. You need to let them know that great things about their background so that you can keep them in your network, right?
Yeah. And Mark, I'm kind of curious, when you're working with your teams or, at these companies that quote unquote, probably have some practices that they've done right. What are some of those things that you've seen have been done well? And from a perspective of really managing the short-term versus long-term gains, right? The short-term is we have requisitions and we need to get filled. And I think what often happens with recruiters is because it's a results-driven environment, we're so much more focused on getting people in the door, getting conversations started. And unless there's a huge counterweight, and I think there's friction to doing this, to equally valuing the employer brand, and like you said, getting that feedback loop in place and actually making sure recruiters are doing that. Like, how do you balance those things? How do you get your recruiters to make sure that they're driving candidates through the door, but at the same time also keep holding them accountable on the feedback stuff? And how have you seen that done well? Because that's a hard problem.
It is a hard problem, and it's not necessarily something that we're tracking. I think it comes down to like what kind of recruiter you want to be, and it's something that we talk about a lot. Sort of like among the millions of other things that you're working on, and all of as a recruiter, you're working at 5 different things at once, and people are emailing you and this and that. You need to really put that as a recruiter into your schedule. I need to get back to candidates and then spend time on that. And, email is great. Phone call is better, right?
Yeah.
Or keep the door open. Look, everybody wants short-term results. These things are going to help you in the long run. People will come back to you. They'll respect you. When they ask, hey, do you know a recruiter who can fill these roles? Your name will come up. And so you want to build that relationship over the entirety of their career, not just for that one role. And that's partly, and then Matt, what you're talking about, employer branding. Do you think that people are going to want to buy your products or shop at your stores or whatever it might be if they had a bad experience with a recruiter?
Yeah.
I would argue probably less so, right? So it's really important to kind of treat people like potential customers.
Yeah. Awesome. Great.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think what I really, picked up on this as well, Mark and Matt, is that, when speaking with candidates, you can be, there's, recruiters that are a little bit more transactional. And when I say transactional, it's something that I picked up, Mark, that you did do very well, is you said, pick up the phone and call them. And I'm actually curious because, I've worked under some great managers in the recruiting field, and they say the same thing too, which is like, hey, pick up the phone. And I'm starting to get into this whole generation, X, Y, millennials and that type of thing where, when you're at dinner sometimes, Mark, whether it's your kids or, people, they're like, they're just jamming on their phone. Right. And it's easy to break up with people on the phone. You remember back in those days in high school, whether it's an SMS, it's like, hey, we're done. or you just pick up the phone and literally talk about it, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I want to get your sense on this too, right? Where, in my perspective, picking up the phone takes a little bit more time, but the relationship that you get from this, and case in point, right? This podcast versus, hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Hope you're well.
Yeah.
Right. And so have you seen any, I'm getting a little bit more philosophical here with like the shift between generations in recruiting, but have you seen that as well? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think, it's much easier to kind of hide behind email, and even text to a lesser extent. But I have seen that sort of like it goes along the same lines of sort of like bulk in mailing, a ton of candidates, and thinking like, that's your job and your job is over. The problem that we run into is I think we lose respect as recruiters. And I've sort of been really, we deal with the ramifications of that. Mm-hmm. So what I mean is that hiring managers treat us just like paper pushers if we're going to do that.
Agreed.
So you bulk email 200 people, some people who look good get back to you. You send them to your hiring manager without talking to them. They want to interview them. You have a very brief 5-minute call because you know that the hiring manager already wants. I mean, to me, that's really not recruiting, and you're actually not adding much value to the business. A better way to go about it potentially would be to be a critical thinker, to add value, to really understand what the hiring managers are looking for, have interesting conversations with your candidates so you can add color to the conversation when you're talking to your hiring manager. So just going much deeper, when I talk to my teams, some of the things that we talk about are developing your critical thinking abilities, really, because you present candidates to hiring managers, they're thinking like, why should I talk to them? And the other part, other than critical thinking, is your communication skills. And so those sort of I don't think you can be really successful with one or the other without the other, right? So those are two things that you really need to work on in order to really build your career as recruiting. But to your question, I think we've gotten away from a lot of that. And unfortunately, if you work for a very well-known brand, you're going to get a lot of people applying. And it's really easy to do that job kind of where you just fling resumes.
Yeah. And this is a really great tip, Mark, too, for candidates as well. So I know that you mentioned when you present a candidate forward to a hiring manager, to the C-level suite, what are some of the things that stand out? And when I ask that question, right, as you think about it, it's, I don't think as an industry now, everyone's looking for just that education piece, right? Or your GPA, right? When you're presenting, call it a most placeable candidate, or call it, you're just doing a professional presentation. What are some of the things that, marquee companies are really looking for now for candidates that are, looking to apply?
It's a good question. I think it's really relevant for people that are sort of on the job hunt right now. Like, how do I make myself stand out? Think like a recruiter. So what you really want to focus on are the key requirements for the role, right? And also the sort of nice to have. So hopefully it's a well-written job description, but you want to look in there and you want to make as many direct correlations between your background and what they're looking for, and then provide, detailed information on specific examples where you've done that and what the end results were. So if you're that's what a top tier recruiter would do. They would look at someone's resume, and in their conversation with them, they were like, hey, here's the top 3 things that we're looking for. Can you give me examples where you've done this? Right. And so you as a candidate can actually help the recruiter. Even if they're not asking you, you can ask them, this is what I see as your top requirements. Here is what I see as your nice to have skills. Is there anything else that I should know? Is there anything else that's not included in the job description? And then kind of go back, spend some time, and then give them those detailed examples of why you're a great fit within that job description. That sort of that's very meaty, right? That's something that if this is true, if your ideal candidate has these skills, and here's why you should consider me.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing there is it's a core thing going back to how do recruiters set themselves apart from the pack of kind of the average, which is go the extra mile, go the extra step in terms of your outreach to candidates and tailor messages, actually build relationships, have it be a people interaction rather than a transactional one. Same thing with your hiring managers, go the extra mile and try to understand exactly what the hiring manager needs, try to work with them to make sure they're casting the right net, especially if they don't have the brand of an Amazon to get that natural inbound. And that same theme applies to candidates. Go the extra mile. Recruiters, their time is literally their money. They're oftentimes spinning 20 plates on, on sticks at once. So do the job for them, which means kind of spoon feed them everything they would have had to do on their own. And now you're saving their time and you're actually giving them a win, right? Because it is a results driven business and you're just saying, here, this is what you need. I have maybe 60 or 70% of what you're looking for, but here's why I'm excited. Here's the specific job I'm applying to, rather than, hey, I see you're working at Amazon. Can you help me find a job? Right? That's never going to work.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to be what's brushed over. So that's awesome. And I want to synthesize all those things.
Absolutely. And, think about, aside from the core requirements and the plus and the must-haves, a lot of companies have sort of key tenants, right? And sometimes they take them very seriously. At Amazon, they do the 14 leadership principles. Other things that you want to think about is you want to look at those. You want to come up with specific examples in your background where you've done those things, using the STAR technique: situation, task, action, result.
Love that.
You want to really build those things out. You can probably apply it to most other companies. So when people talk to you, it's a casual conversation. You can automatically bring those things up. A lot of times when I talk to candidates, I'm like, I understand you're not a professional interviewer. You maybe do this once every 3 or 5 years, maybe, maybe less, maybe more, but not everyone does this every day. So you're going to have to really spend some time thinking about what are your very best examples that you can communicate to other people, not necessarily just examples, because sometimes they get caught in what happens is from the interviewer side, they are interviewing a candidate and they kind of rank their examples to the internal team, and they realize, well, I didn't really like this guy's example, this gal's example. Maybe they have a better one. I don't know. But that's why we have to encourage them to give your very best examples, and not just something that you're kind of so on with.
Awesome.
No, that's good. That's good. And I think we're kind of segueing to more into the candidate arena as well. And so I wanted to ask a question there to, kind of encompass that. So Mark, for marquee companies, even now, I guess the question here is really trying to help, candidates and people around to tease out, some of these tips and habits and actionable items that they could even implement in these type of markets, right? For example, we're going through COVID until, a vaccine, whenever that comes out, the market is still going to be unknown. But Mark, the question here is, for bigger marquee companies, right, to your knowledge, are they currently hiring right now? What are they going through? Should candidates even apply? If they do, what should they do? What are some tips and strategies? And more importantly, what's the market looking like in terms of larger marquee brands, right, and tech companies?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Amazon continues to hire. A lot of other companies are continuing to hire right now. Although, we've seen lots of layoffs recently with like Airbnb and Uber.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that they're going to pick up at some point. But without a doubt, I think what you want to do in terms of, let's say you're on the market, you're looking for a new role, think of like a recruiter, and that basically you're the star candidate and you need to get this person interviews. And how would you go about doing that? What recruiters do is they compile, for example, like if you're working at an agency, you would have a whole list of companies that you would want to first research. You want to understand, how do they make money, maybe read their 10Ks if they're public companies. You really want to do your work and research and really understand what they're about. Literally, if you're in the Bay Area, there's thousands of companies that you might reach out to. You want to find out who your key contacts are in those companies. It could be alumni networks. It could be anything that you might have in common. Maybe you worked with someone previously at a couple companies previously that is now working at another company, and maybe they're hiring, right? So you want to be organized, perhaps have a spreadsheet, with the companies and maybe the type of role, links to the roles. You want to have your key contacts and reach out to those people, let them know why you're interested in the role, and see if they would actually refer you. Because I know a lot of companies look at referred candidates first before they look at people who've just randomly applied. You certainly want to create like a human connection within a company. Otherwise, you might get lost in just applying with everybody else.
No, definitely agree. And I think I asked that question mainly because, in call it 2020 now, right? When you're applying to a job, right, and you're just submitting a resume, it's so difficult. And I'm talking pre-COVID-19. It was already difficult to get your resume into the hiring manager's hands and for them to even get on a call with you, right? And I'm saying that, whereas in my opinion, today, when you get a call from a recruiter, you're like, holy shit, like they're calling me back, right? Yeah. Whereas, you apply to a lot of resume, or you apply to a lot of jobs before you get one hit back. But I think, the question here, Mark, is do you, even with COVID, I think it puts an exponent, on that as well. And so I'm actually curious, like, imagine if you're in the job market now, Mark, right? Like, I'd say, like, let's say tomorrow, again, knock on wood, I'm not saying you're switching jobs in any means, right? But, if you were a candidate in today's market, right, how would you go about job applications, regardless if it's large companies or small? Because there's, I think, the stats to date, as of April, were 16.8 million and up in the US that are unemployed. Right. Yeah. And so there's a larger pool. Right. And so if you were going to go about it, how would you go about that?
Right. Well, one of the things, as you're talking, so you have your network of people. Something that is important to do, even before COVID, and hopefully you've done something like this, is have a list of executive connections. And if you haven't, now's a great time to start doing it. Get in touch with those people that you admire. So, for example, whatever functional area you're in, who would be an executive in that space? And you can introduce yourself. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have anything in common with them, point that out. That will kind of create that rapport, that connection. Ask for an informational interview, whatever you can do to kind of like put yourself out there and let them know why you're interested in their company. So definitely research what they do. And then in terms of positions, you just really want to create as much potential synergy between what you've done, what you're really excited about doing, and what they're looking for. Even now, if they don't have any positions listed, sometimes companies aren't even mentioning positions that might be listed because, let's face it, they're getting thousands of resumes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's okay. You still want to, highlight your main accomplishments, get your resumes out there. But at the end of the day, it really becomes a numbers game too. And so you really want to create, random number. There could be like 100 companies,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can always change that. But I think it's important to sort of like build that out, keep track of it, keep track of your conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
And, Zoom is free. You can go on and have, short Zoom conversations with people. It creates a little bit more of a, I think, a personal approach than just doing like email or just like a short call.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much more that you can kind of learn about someone. And we started doing that on my team in Gap is starting to like do Zooms. This was even before COVID, doing Zooms as our first step. And it's a little bit of a different practice, especially if like you're going super fast and but think about the rapport that you start building, the things that you learn from a candidate, and they're going to learn about you when you can see them versus just a voice on the phone. So that's a little bit of a differentiator. So kind of the main takeaways is try to think of those things that are going to differentiate yourself from the others.
Yeah. I think that's really awesome, Mark. And I think, on that aspect of differentiating, I think kind of to add to what you said almost as commentary, I think there's kind of two buckets you can put in, right? There's the companies that actually have posted and are hiring, obviously low-hanging fruit, do everything you just mentioned. But, the stuff that you're interested in are always going to be an easier sell because you're naturally going to, put that positivity and that passion into whatever you're communicating. And so creating that target list of companies that you would love to work for regardless, and reaching out to them and saying, hey, from what I can tell, you're not hiring at all, but I would love the opportunity to talk to you guys about my skill set and how I could potentially add value for you guys, whether it's now or in the future. And now you're planting seeds that might not even, realize for a year or two. I had a situation recently with a guy that's now talking to a company that I'm consulting for. And he had talked to one of the partners 3 years ago. And I happened to know him through another reason and submitted him. He's like, oh, I know that guy. He's looking. He's great. We never actually worked together, but he's a really good guy. Let's talk to him and see what we can do for him. Right. It's almost like when you approach it that way, you're getting people involved in the problem of, helping you. Right. So that's some other commentary that I thought about, right? Like have that target list of stuff that you're really passionate about, because that can be a great way to get into like your dream job. Right. And it does happen. I see it.
Yeah, that's a great point. You can't underestimate the power of passion, because when you think about it, if you interview someone with a good skill set, right, for a position, but you interview someone with a good skill set, but they really want it, that's the person that's going to get the role. So a lot of these things that we're talking about, we haven't really touched on kind of that. And that's kind of like the secret sauce. I've seen time and time again, hiring managers so enthusiastic about a candidate because they really wanted it. And that kind of like sense of passion really shone through. And as recruiters, when you talk to candidates and they're really passionate about what they do, I mean, they just stick out like, it's so evident for everybody to see. They do stuff on the side, right, in the space. They take classes. They tell everybody, their whole face lights up when they talk about whatever that might be, right?
Yeah. It's contagious.
It's contagious. They get everybody else really upbeat and positive. They love what they do. And you want to work with people like that. No one really wants to work with people that are kind of like on the other side of that spectrum. So stay positive, be proactive, stay focused, and just realize, you know, at the end of the day, it's going to be a numbers game. So you really kind of just have to network, stay focused, and be super positive.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Mark, I always look at recruiting kind of like a relationship, you know, when you're asking a girl out or a guy, right? Or, you know, your wife to marry you, right? It's like, do you really want me? It doesn't, you know, doesn't seem like it. Right. And
you paused when I popped the question. What was that about?
Yeah. And so I think that's the big analogy is the relationship, right? Why should it be any different than any other relationship? Of course, is it as serious as marrying your wife? Probably not, right? Or your husband? Probably not. But at the end of the day, it is a relationship where these people are going to be spending X number amount of time or years, right? And hours, minutes, right? With you on a day to day, right? Yeah. And if you really don't want it and you're just doing it for the paycheck every 2 weeks, then sometimes you got to ask the question, right? And look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah,
right.
That's a really good point. Lately, I've been watching Michael Jordan's Last Dance, right?
Oh, it's so good. It's fantastic.
And it's really inspirational. I mean, he didn't make his high school team in sophomore year.
Yeah.
And his mom said, you know, you go out there and show him what you got. So he spent the entire summer working his butt off. He came back and he grew 5 inches, and the rest is history. But, you know, talk about someone who had a passion for, he was never going to let that happen again. And, you know, I think he, you know, at the end of the day, you have to focus on like what's in your control. What can I control? And you can control your attitude. You control your drive. You can make it happen on your own. And everything else, you just kind of have to keep on going.
Yeah, it's that whole like preparation meets luck, right? Like he couldn't control the fact that he was going to shoot up 5 inches, but he sure as hell could control the, you know, the work that he put in so that when he did have that 5 inches, he knew how to use it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
No, I want to actually take that, you know, bit of advice here and apply it into the recruiting world, right? And so I'm thinking of this off the cuff here as well, right? So Mark, imagine, you know, candidates, and Matt, you know, candidates are applying, you know, to these jobs. And I think what you can't control is if the hiring manager is going to pick you up, but what you can control, and at least in my perspective, I've been suggesting to candidates, this is your perfect time to level up and fine tune yourself, your skills, and the things that you actually want to put on paper. And what I'm getting at is the resume, right? And so I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on this, Mark, where when you're looking at a resume, right, today, what are some of the things that candidates can actually take this time to do during the quarantine? Because a lot of people, even those that are employed that are like, you know what, I might be looking for work here or there, they've got an extra hour and a half to 2 hours of time without the commute now, right? And so when looking at a resume, what are some of those things, you know, that you or maybe companies typically look for? Is it, you know, tenure? Is it companies? Is it the skills? And as I ask that question, it's because I find the resume is your first, you know, ticket, right? Or your foot in the door. But sometimes I see resumes where they're like, you know what, I'm a proactive analytical thinker that does this, this, and this. But then I ask the question, but yes, what did you exactly do? What were some of your accomplishments? And I'm tying this back to what you said previously. But again, here, passing the mic over to you, you know, what are some of those things that you find are, you know, as candidates are working through, that they should definitely focus on?
Yeah, I mean, so if there's a specific role that they're applying to, you want to basically craft your resume around that. And you want to call out your accomplishments, and a lot of people sort of leave out the results piece. So this is what the situation was, and this is what I did. That's great. But at any time you can quantify the results, it's much more powerful. So that's what I would recommend. Sort of like building your resume to, and it, you know, as a candidate, you want to spend some time thinking about this. As you know, you think back on, like, put yourself in the recruiter's shoes, and you're their star candidate. and you think like, well, how do I best want to be seen? Think about all the amazing things that you did and be able to find a way to quantify that. And then when there's a position that opens up, you want to basically craft your resume. You want to tie it to that role. You want to be able to speak to those accomplishments. And it's going to require some practice. You're going to write these things down. You're going to want to say them out loud. You want to talk to other people about them so that it just becomes second nature,
Right.
So when people ask you, tell me about a time when, you can say, I've got some great examples. Here you go. Blah, 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 blah. And so it just becomes really easy to talk about those specific things. That's how, if you're looking for a specific role to fill, that's where your resume will really come to the top. So the other things, are, I think, resume best practices. Don't have a 6-page resume. Condense it. 2 pages is fine. Call out those things that you're really most proud of, and spend time thinking about that.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'd be curious to know what you think about this, Mark. As a recruiter, my favorite section on the resume, because what you said was like the prerequisites, like this is the must-haves that we need to have in the resume to make it actionable for a recruiter or an internal hiring manager. But my actual like favorite aspect of the recruiter is like the interest section, or if you've done like volunteer work or projects. For me, when I was earlier on in my career and I was coming out of college, I put study abroad front, right, and center because it was my way of litmus testing the culture and to see if that was something that like, did you like traveling? Like that's a core tenet of who I am. So if I know you do, like that's important to me. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because it has nothing to do with your ability to do the role, but the resume isn't a perfect proxy of a human being, right? And so that's why I think that's the stuff that actually bridges that gap. What are your thoughts on those more like, human side of the aspects of the resume that I think aren't talked about as much?
Yeah, I think it's important. But it's funny because I do see that. And then I see people following the same example, but they're still not talking about who they are. So for example, they might see their friend's resume, traveled to 75 different countries, volunteered for this. And then they're going to write, travel to these countries and volunteer for that. And it's like, well, no, who are you? What are your interests? And that's what I would like to see. And think about it also if you're a candidate, think about it in a selfish way. What if the hiring manager is really interested in something that you might have some interest in, whether or not it's whatever it might be? List those things. It doesn't need to be a book, right? Just, here's some of my favorite things. This is a little bit more about me. And that's all. It's just sort of like icebreakers. I think it's something to sort of create that human element beyond just like, I'm not just my skill set.
Yeah. And one of the best like first interview tips I was ever given was if you're going in for an in-person, obviously COVID, we're not doing as much of this stuff. If you're going into someone's office, scan the room for something that ties back to who you are, right? So if you see a picture of like Joe Montana on the wall and you like sports, like great opener. And I think you can take that even now in COVID when you're not interacting in person. The lovely thing about LinkedIn is that it's kind of put all that information out on the platter. So if you know who you're actually sending the resume to and the information, and you see that they went to the same alma mater as you, like I went to Oregon and Oregon Duck fans are fanatics, right? Or Berkeley, right? I would try to call that out. I would try to make that front line and center because I know that they're going to advocate for me more than the general pack.
I totally agree. I think that's really important. But be genuine,
Of course.
Tell me about your time at University of Oregon. Really listen.
Yeah.
And then, but then be sure to be able to back up the interview
of course,
with concrete examples where you're a good fit, because what you want to get away from is them thinking, oh, they're trying to weasel their way into the role by creating a good rapport that we both went to Oregon, but knowing that they're probably not the best fit. So
of course,
I love that.
Just be
finding that fine line.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I want to have some fun here a little. And so I kind of thought about this, and going back to the resume piece here a little. I know we're talking about interviews, but even getting an interview is super difficult these days, right? And Mark, so I want to give you a real, kind of a real life example right now, right? So, obviously I'll use myself as an example. If I gave you my resume right now, 2 pages, right, and said, hey, Mark, here you go, I'm interested, right? When you take that resume and you're glancing through this resume, what are the, if you can walk through it, kind of talk us through your thoughts, right? But what are the first 5 things that you look for? And the reason why I ask you this is because you can see it on the news that sometimes recruiters, they only have 20 seconds to look at your resume, and then you're off, right? Some of them are pretty particular where they're like, hey, if you have a grammatical error, you're done, right? But I think in your perspective, and again, there's no right or wrong answer. So I hand this over to you. Walk us through your thoughts. What are the first few things that you go through?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Some of the things I think about is how long is this resume? Just glancing through it really quickly. What are the the companies that this person's worked at, but also comparing it to a specific job that I'm looking to fill. And so a lot of recruiters basically will have the job description and have the resume, and they're trying to create, understand the sort of similarities. Oh, you've done this, I'm looking for this. You've done that, I'm looking for that. Oh, I should probably talk to you, right? Yeah. So kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, make it easy on the recruiter. That's what he's talking about. Craft your resume so that I can easily see that the position I'm looking to fill and the things that I'm looking for, you have already called out for me. And that way I'm like, oh my God. And when we have that conversation, I'm sure a lot of candidates have had it. The recruiter is really excited to talk to you, because you have everything that they're looking for. And that's really what makes the difference. So do everybody a favor, call out those accomplishments, tie them to the requirements for the role. So those are a couple of things that I look for. Organization, grammatical errors. If I see grammatical errors, yikes. I'll ask the candidate to kind of redo the resume, because it's not anything that you really want to present to a hiring manager. If sometimes you see people have degrees but no university, or weird things like just general stuff that just doesn't seem to make any sense. You basically want them to kind of redo those things to put them in the best light. So spend extra time on your resume, make sure that everything is makes sense, and share it with some of your friends and get their feedback as well.
Yeah. And then and thanks for that, Mark. I think on top of that, I think a lot of times, right, and it depends on the role, but the general rule of thumb is, recruiters are looking for an arc and a story to a career path that makes kind of digestible sense, right? And I kind of look at that, right? Like, you went to here. Oh, it kind of makes sense that you went to here. You spent a couple years at each, right? Oh, it makes sense why you're applying to me. Like, that's the ideal. It's not every role. Like, again, in not all functional areas are like that. Like, engineers that are really good might just bounce around from projects, and that's okay. I guess where I'm getting at with this is knowing that when you have a candidate that's in a situation that has recently been impacted with a departure situation that is kind of hard to explain with the resume, like, I guess the big one is kind of like a layoff. How do you recommend them go about communicating that when they don't necessarily have the conversation yet? Do you recommend them putting that on the resume and calling it out and putting it front and center? Because my thing is always get out in front of a question that they're going to ask anyway.
Right.
Is what are your thoughts around that? Because a lot of people are being laid off about like right now, and I think they're trying to struggle how to communicate that on paper.
I don't know if you necessarily need to call that out on a resume. But at the same time, I don't think that recruiters should automatically think that this candidate is any less than anybody else who might be passive. I think that, in our industry, it's pretty pervasive. For some reason, we think that passive candidates are better than people that are currently looking for work.
Everybody wants what they can't have, Mark. That's what it is. It's a human nature thing,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And that just requires, it comes back to our ability to be able to evaluate talent and having that conversation with them, and then be able to really base it on, your evaluation on some sort of data. Like, well, why do you feel this way? Why is this candidate great? And be able to communicate that in a way that actually makes sense. So, and it kind of comes back to the critical thinking that we talked about earlier, that I think recruiters need to have in the communication skills to be able to make that palpable. Like, hey, this person worked at this company, no longer, with them. Here's the reasons why they're a good fit. If you have any concerns about them no longer working, here's some of the reasons why. They let go 80% of their company. Whatever.
And then I guess taking that a step forward to, hey, congratulations. Like, you got that first recruiter phone screen. I have two questions kind of around that. Like, now that you actually have your foot in the door, you have the conversation, is there a framework that you recommend a candidate talk about, a less than stellar departure? And then the second one is kind of a two-part question, is when you're in a situation, like, it's never a perfect match. It's never really one-to-one. Like, I'm looking for this and someone has everything I'm looking for. I mean, it does happen, but it's rare. So that means you're going to have examples to bring up, but there's always a situation where someone asks for an example or exposure to something that you don't necessarily have. How do you recommend a candidate, I guess the word that comes to mind, spin, but take a question that, or a question that they haven't had exposure to and phrase it in a positive light that actually kind of, makes them look adaptable or something else. So I guess two-part question, but I guess, the first one is kind of, how do you communicate with the departures?
All right. Just be transparent, but don't bag on your company that you work for.
That's great.
And I don't think I think pretty much everybody, there's just so many talented people that are being affected right now. It's not like you're the only one in the world. And so probably you can just leave it at that. Maybe call up previous performance reviews or saying, hey, you know what? I was really good at what I did. My current or my previous manager is a referral. If you'd like to talk to them, happy to do that. And then your second part of your question
was around hiring managers or recruiters ask for examples. There's going to be times where they ask for your exposure to something and you maybe had limited exposure to it or none at all.
Yeah.
How do you recommend a candidate, or is there a framework to going about those types of conversations and bringing it back to, framing it in a positive way? Like, how do you go about that? Because clearly you want to be transparent about your experience. You don't want to lie. How do you turn it into a positive? If you can?
And I think, let's be honest. Probably, there's very few roles out there where where you would be 100% fit for everything that they're looking for, because you've never actually worked at that company. There maybe you're a fit for 60% of the things that they're looking for. Maybe it's 70. How do you cover the other things? And I think it's important it's about learning agility and being able to come up with specific examples of hey, I didn't know anything about leading teams. I was thrown into this. I'm currently leading a team of 10. Here's how I ramped up really quickly. And be able to come with those specific examples of your examples of success. so they can feel confident that like, oh yeah, no, they haven't done this, but they sure have proven that they can learn things quickly and ramp up quickly. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I can kind of chime in on this too, because I actually come across this a lot. And when I think about this, the question that you asked, Matt, I actually call it looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, when you get the question, and I think I take along that in times like this through adversity, it's true. Desperate people do desperate things. And when you get asked something, you always want to say, pick me, or yes, I have this, even though when they ask the question, you should actually synthesize it and ask yourself. I look at it as very binary, 0 or 1, right? Have I done this or have I not, right? Or is it in between and it's a shade of gray, right? And if so, tell them that, right? And then just go off of something like, you could say something where, hey, I've never done this before, end it there. Or you could actually say, yes, although I haven't done this before, this is what I have done, and I feel that it's going to be attributable to this certain task. And I think, when I say that, I have an example in mind too, where the candidate that I was speaking to for a specific role, they never had the specific skill set, but I think they caught themselves right after the interview, and they sent a case study, right, of their specific example. So instead of a resume, you're actually getting more information. And so, I mean, obviously tread lightly. Some hiring managers don't like you to bombard their email with just, nonsense, right? But if you've put together a case study that's actually well thought out, I think that could give you an edge, right? Whereas now the hiring managers are going back to their, recruiters or their hiring managers to say, hey, I also got this info. Do you think it'll be helpful? Right. And so I just wanted to add that in as well.
Yeah. And from a hiring company, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's also going back to that employer brand and what do we really stand for? And are we hiring for skill sets, or are we hiring for core attributes of human beings? And so, like, I guess my preference, if I had my own company, and maybe this isn't all companies, was I would rather hire someone that, can, rather than hiring someone that can do a rote task, I would hire someone that is adaptable. It could learn a task, right? The critical thinking part that you mentioned, right? Teach a man to fish versus, fishing for them, I guess, so to speak. Because that's going to be so much more powerful in any type of company. Someone that can problem solve or learn new skill sets and figure out how to be solution oriented rather than just staying in their box.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the interviews should be data driven. They should be asked, or if critical thinking is a really core skill, it's the ability to think. So, give them specific use cases where they have to demonstrate their ability to think. That way you can have confidence.
No, I love that. And I think as we're approaching on time, I want to summarize here a little where, we walk through, companies, larger companies, what they're looking for if they were to hire. There are, people and companies that are hiring. We walk through the candidate side as well, where, interview strategies, resumes, tips, should do, should not. I think as we have, and, we're kind of waxing down to our last, 10, 15 minutes here, Matt and I, we actually come up with these fun questions, right, as well. And Mark, it's a different spin to it. So the fun questions, really, it's anything philosophical, whatever. And so, Matt, do you want to go first, or do you want me to shoot out a question?
I do. I love my question. My question, Mark, is if you had to pick like your representation of what your spirit animal would be, what would it be and why? And feel free to take a moment to like absorb this, right? Because this is going to be out there in the ether forever. Like, you don't want to pick the wrong one, right?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Dare I say a lion?
Wow.
I have a particular fondness for Scotland and the Lion of Scotland, and yeah, I think that I like.
Was there ever lions in Scotland? Like, what's the association?
I think I hear there were forests too, so things have changed over the millennia. But
I've never heard of a Scottish lion. So,
No, that's awesome. No,
okay,
I
cool.
think my wife and I, we decided that we're getting a bunny or something through this time, and we're actually picking it up today. I know you brought up lion, but the thing is, we're calling the bunny Leo because she was just like, hey, it's a guy, it matches kind of with your horoscope, right? And so we're calling it Leo. At least that's what I think, right? And so when I think of lion, I'm just like, hey, there's probably more attributes that you're, kind of relating to as well, right?
Yeah, it's fun.
Great.
Yeah,
great.
honestly, we've never actually asked this question on the podcast, so I want to go round table. Sam, what's yours?
Ooh, see, mine's kind of evolved, right? So
I had
like
to
I
catch
used
him
to,
off guard. I didn't want to
yeah,
give him
you
time
kind
to
of caught me
prepare.
off guard. I think as you transition, like I'll split it into two categories: before 18 and after 18, when you get a little bit of maturity, right?
All
And
right.
so
Metamorphosis.
I think before 18, I'd call myself like a crazy chimp. I was so curious all the time. If I saw something, I would pick it up. I would play with it. If I go up to people, I'd just like go up and be like, hey, Mark, what are you doing? Right. So I was always like this class clown. I would go there, and I don't mean to distract people. Right. But I was always very curious. Right. I was always very into relationships and people. Hence probably why I switched over from accounting and finance to recruiting, because I'd rather talk to a person than look at a number, right? And that's just my own perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so my, of course, parents, aside here, but parents aren't too happy. They're like, hey, you got your CPA and you're going to recruiting. And I'm like, it's you could take positive and negatives. But after 18, I think I would say that this crazy chimp kind of turned more into like an elephant, right? And when I say elephant, it's like, I look at myself now. I definitely try to think and listen more instead of just babbling, right? And just going off. And I think something that I would actually relate myself to, elephants, they typically have a better memory. And I would say my memory is actually not too shabby when it comes to memorizing numbers, when it comes to, memorizing countries of the world, things like that. And so I feel like, the crazy chimp is turning into like a mammoth or like an elephant. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's
awesome.
I would never have thought that.
Yeah.
The chimp elephant.
The chimp elephant. Yeah.
It's a new species. It's evolving. It just, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go. It's funny. You said elephant, and the only reason I was going to say elephant wasn't necessarily because of all the good traits you mentioned, but because I have a habit of being clumsy and stepping on things, which now that I have a 6-month-old at home, I've been very cognizant of, because I don't want to like step on the wrong thing, right? So that's why I was going to pick elephant. I think if I had to give a specific situation, right, of like an animal, right, it would kind of be that bull in a china shop a little bit. So it's a little bit going to your chimpanzee. Except now I'm kind of I think I've grown into the bull that's like in the in the pasture, that doesn't feel like he's like confined. So that's my transition. I was a bull in a china shop, and now I'm a bull in the pasture, right? I'm a little bit more chill. I'm like calm, right? I still have the ability to use my horns, but I just don't feel the motivation anymore to do it. So that's my thoughts on that. Anyway, so thanks for entertaining us on that one, Mark. And Sam, you had a fun question as well.
Yeah, and our last fun question before we wrap up this episode. So I came up with this question because I at least for myself, I look at COVID where a lot of people, have a little bit more time to, do a reset on themselves, right? And I'm going a little philosophical here, right? But my question is, if realizing what you realize now, when you're looking at your timeline, if someone came up and said, you know what, call it COVID, call it the end of the world, an asteroid's coming. Mark, Matt, you got 6 months or 3 to 6 months to live, right? What are some of those things that you're actually going to focus on?
Am I working?
Hey, that's up to you. Hey, you could, Mark, you could say,
I have 6 months to live. What am I going to spend my time on?
Yeah. And everything's up to you, right?
It
So
can
like
be working, I guess.
yeah,
Okay.
and you can be, or you could do the throw up your paper, you know, those memes, Mark, where it's like, I'll deal with it tomorrow.
Oh my goodness. What a question to end on. Yeah, man. Just spend time with family and all those good things that you want to do. And it's creative projects and people. And, I love being out. With COVID, it's a little bit tough, but still do the things that I've always loved. Get outside, hiking, people, family, all that good stuff. Yeah, it's kind of a dour subject, but just spend the things spend your time on the things that you enjoy, and the rest will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Awesome.
And Matt?
I mean, like I have a baby that's 6 months old, and she's like adorable. And, if I could spend every waking moment with her, just like playing around, that's what I would do. It's awesome. I think that the family thing is, a big tenet of it. If this COVID situation wasn't in the picture, I would for sure try to do it while traveling. Because I love that stuff, right? Go back to Buenos Aires, places in Colombia, whatever. I think, change the landscape a little bit. Pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think for myself, I'm actually putting in the time to synthesize this now, which is kind of why I asked the question, right? But I would actually want to, lead more into interdependence, where, the first half of my life, and I say like most of my life, it's, you grow up and it's more, selfish thoughts, right? Greed, like how can I make more? How can I do more? How can I eat more? How could I wear more? Right. And I think I'm leaning more into not just, family, but the people around me and community per se, right? It's, how could I spend time doing the things that can not just help myself, but really more to help other people, so that you feel, more of an intrinsic, side of satisfaction, right? And so I think that's what I'm kind of delving into. And this kind of, talks about more, philanthropic ventures, call it, right? And so I think that's, been giving me a lot of inspiration. So if I had 3 to 6 months, I would say I would dump all my time into that and try to synthesize something where I could, when I rest in peace, I'm just like, you know what, I'm in a happy place, and, the community's in a happy place.
Have you, there's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Interbeing.
Ooh, I love books.
You should check that out. It's kind of along the same lines of what you're talking about.
It's so funny you just brought that up, because I was going to throw in a last question, which was, what's a book that you've recently referred to someone else? And I guess you just answered it. So
I love that.
Interbeing.
I mean, you answered it before I asked the question, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Interbeing.
No, I love it. Yeah. Interbeing. I love that.
What's the high level, like, what's the cliff notes? Like, what's it focused on?
So
you can describe it.
Thich Nhat Hanh, if you guys aren't aware, and people listening, basically he's a Buddhist monk that's lived in exile in France for many years. He's Vietnamese, and he lives in this place called Plum Village. He's written a number of books. Interbeing is basically how we're all interconnected, and his writing style is very powerful. He's been described as, it's really funny, the combination of a heavy machine, like the power of a machine, but as light as a cloud. So he's super, he actually, during the 60s in the civil rights movement, he was a major influence of Martin Luther King.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of books, and I definitely recommend him.
Wow.
Cool. Thanks for the recommendation. We'll check it out.
Sure.
Well, hey, Mark, it was definitely a pleasure. And with that kind of an ending, I definitely want to say namaste, and I'm definitely going to read your book. But, for us listeners, we want to thank Mark again, veteran recruiter in the tech space in Silicon Valley. Definitely lots of value to offer here as well. Matt and I, super, not only excited, but fortunate to have you on the show. And so if there's any other viewers as well that want to find Mark, you can, search him and find him on LinkedIn. But Mark, where, anywhere else, if people want more advice as it relates to recruiting, candidate tips, where can they find you?
Just currently on LinkedIn. I think that's a great way. Would love to connect with anybody in this space. So, but thank you so much for having me on the show.
Awesome. Thank you. It
guys.
was a pleasure. Hopefully we can do
Matt.
this again.
Thank you, Mark, again.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye now. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please feel free to share, like, and subscribe to our channel via Linktree. You can find us on all of your favorite podcast sources, as well as YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and good luck, everyone.